Hello, welcome to LifeTalk. I'm Mark Crutcher, president of Life Dynamics, and as usual, I'm joined by the usual suspects.
That's us.
Elizabeth McClung. Hello, Elizabeth. How are you? From Texas
Howdy.
Right to Life.
Quite well, thanks.
Quite well. And Melissa Conway. I suppose you're quite well too, also from Texas.
As usual.
And of course, my lovely assistant, Renee Hobbs. Hello,
I'm
Renee.
quite well, thank you.
You're quite well too. Yeah. All right. Got a lot of stuff to get to today, but the first thing up, of course, as it is every week, is Life in 120.
One of the most pro-abortion attorney generals in American history has passed away at the age of 78 from complications of Parkinson's disease. Janet Reno was appointed to the position by Bill Clinton and immediately began using the power of the federal government to go after even peaceful pro-life activists. Life Dynamics president Mark Crutcher says Reno turned the Department of Justice into a private police force for the abortion industry as a political payback for its support of Clinton during the 1992 campaign. The annual 40 Days for Life campaign ended on November 7th, with organizers saying this was the most successful event ever. They documented that 658 babies were saved, but said that the numbers will rise as more data is collected. In Raleigh, North Carolina, a pro-life group announced that they intended to open a crisis pregnancy center next door to a local abortion clinic, but were blocked from doing so by the city's zoning board. The group then filed a discrimination suit against the city, and the board then reversed its decision in a unanimous vote. At this point, the center is back on track. Operation Rescue is reporting that in less than 7 years, 62 women have required emergency treatment following abortions at a St. Louis clinic operated by Planned Parenthood. Operation Rescue President Troy Newman says that the health department has been made aware of the situation but refuses to act. The City Council in Washington, D.C. has voted in favor of a bill legalizing assisted suicide. The legislation was introduced by Council member Mary Che and must be signed by the D.C. mayor before becoming law. The bill can be overturned by the United States Congress. Recently, Michael Hitchborn, head of the Lepanto Institute, reported that Catholic Relief Services was stockpiling contraceptives and abortion-causing drugs to be distributed in foreign countries. Catholic Relief Services initially denied the charge, but a letter from Archbishop Paul Coakley has confirmed that the claims are both accurate and well documented.
Couple of stories here that show you how far down the slippery slope we've gone. These are things that if you'd have told people 30, 40 years ago, if you legalize abortion, you'll eventually do these things. These are the things that the godless left would have said, oh, no, we're never be doing that. That's not ever going to happen. Belgium now has granted minor children the right to die, to doctor-assisted suicide. A child under 12 years old even can now go to a doctor, and if the doctor says, would you like to commit suicide, the doctor can legally execute that child.
That child can't even comprehend euthanasia or death or...
You know, you can talk a 7 or 8 year old kid into anything.
Yeah.
That's why you don't allow them to drive. That's why you don't allow them to give consent to have sex. That's why you don't allow them to sign contracts. You know, there's research out there that shows that a human being's brain doesn't fully develop until they're in their mid-20s. Mm-hmm. And sometimes not even after that, Elizabeth. It happens even to the best of us that it doesn't even develop. I'm 68.
I was thinking about a snarky comment, that's all.
But this is serious. I mean, to sit here and say you're going to let a 10-year-old child tell the doctor, yes, sir, I'd like to go ahead and kill myself, and the doctor will say, okay, I'll lethally inject you like a dog or something. It's mind-boggling, but this is where we are. And in the Netherlands, not too far away, they've expanded their assisted suicide laws even to people who aren't sick or who aren't terminal. They're not dying. They're not even sick. A doctor can assist them in committing suicide.
These people are saying that their lives are complete, and that's why they want to go. Well, their life is not complete until natural death takes place.
Until God says it's complete.
That's right.
Right.
That's when your life is complete.
You talk about a slippery slope. This is at the bottom of the slope. How much lower can it get?
Oh, no, it can get lower than this. I can give you an
just
example.
appalled.
You're going to expand assisted death performed by a physician to people who are not sick and dying, how far are you away from the point where the relatives of this person can say, we want them injected? And we're not far from that at all.
And it gets into one of the more difficult aspects of the pro-life conversation, not the beginning of life pro-life conversation, but the end of life conversation, because you have to bring up the topic of the redemptive value of suffering. And when somebody's going through something difficult, or if they think their life is complete, bridging that gap of communicating there is value in difficult times, there is value in life, that can be a very difficult conversation to have.
Yes, it can. Renee and I have talked about something very similar to this, about the fact many times, just privately. I look back on my life, and I can tell you, if you said, what are the 10 best lessons that you've learned in your life? I learned all of those in times of trouble. You don't learn stuff from good things that happen to you. You don't learn valuable life lessons from those. You learn from the trials and from the times that you're in a situation that it looks hopeless. That's where you learn valuable lessons. And you can see this throughout life. I've told Renee the analogy one time years ago when Jimmy Johnson was still a coach of the Cowboys. And they were interviewing him after a game that they had just beat the devil out of somebody. They beat somebody 58-3 or something like that. And they were asking him, what'd you learn from this game? He said, we didn't learn anything. He said, we're not even going to watch the film. We didn't learn anything. You don't learn anything from a game that you beat somebody 58-3. You learn from the game that you lose 58-3 or that you lose 14-13. Those are where you learn how you get better.
Well, life is naturally designed. Look at the birthing process. The birthing process in and of itself is not an easy process, but what comes out of it, the greatest gift,
Right.
the gift of life. Mother is goes through all the difficulty of childbirth, but she is given the greatest gift, her child.
Right.
So through that, there is much beauty that's achieved. And so pressure doesn't necessarily mean that life isn't worth living. It means we just have to look at it from a different perspective.
To be truly pro-life, we have to protect and defend innocent human life at the beginning and also at the other end of the spectrum at the end.
Well, that's the quote we had from Hubert Humphrey on the last show. You know, a nation is judged by how it treats those in the dawn of life,
In the
the
twilight.
twilight of life, and in the shadows of life. And that really is, that's a beautiful statement. I've thought about that many, many times over the years. He made that back in the 60s. He made that statement.
Yeah, and our society today says that it's much easier just to give up and to quit than it is to fight and
Right.
to push on too.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. But this idea that you're going to let a 10-year-old child tell his doctor, or the doctor ask him, you know, would you like me to go ahead and euthanize you, put you to sleep like a dog, you know? I don't know what you say. I mean, you know, we're always coming up with things on this show that, you know, you look at and you say, I don't know what you say about that. I really don't know what to say about this. And I want to meet what kind of doctor it would be who would do this. But I guarantee you they're out there. And, you know, you say, oh, no legitimate doctor would do this.
Same type of doctor that would kill a baby in the womb.
Right. 50 years ago, that's what people would have said. No legitimate physician is going to do a third trimester elective abortion. Well, here we are.
As long as the check is written and
Check is, yeah, if the
they're
check
willing to
clears,
do.
or your MasterCard has got enough, your debit card's got enough to pay for it, then somebody will do it. We want to do a real quick update on the situation with David Daleiden in the Center for Medical Progress. We've talked on the show before about this bill in California to protect Planned Parenthood. And if you don't think this was designed just to protect Planned Parenthood, it was to protect our whole medical community, you're nuts. Planned Parenthood actually wrote the language for it.
yes, they did.
They worked with the Attorney General, Kamala Harris. She ought to be in prison for this. But they've now passed legislation. Jerry Brown signed it into law to prohibit any kind of undercover investigation into Planned Parenthood. So the David Daleiden type things and things that we've done out there would be illegal, supposedly, under this new bill. It's clearly unconstitutional. But I don't think the Constitution means anything to most of America, and certainly doesn't mean anything in the state of California. But this is an outrage.
Yeah, it's a two-tier assault. It's assault against the sanctity of life, but it's also an assault against the constitutional right of freedom of speech.
Right.
And also, you know, this journalists in general, they're trying to, the undercover journalist, at least with David Daleiden, he was trying to hold the abortion industry accountable. He was trying to expose the atrocities. And rather than let folks know what's happening behind closed doors, instead, they're going to limit free speech. They're going to lock it down tight with rules that are now going to prosecute these undercover journalists. And it's just not right.
Well, and I'll tell you something that's interesting about that, Melissa, to me, is that why isn't the legitimate, the so-called mainstream media in California, why aren't they raising a ruckus about this?
You would think they would.
I can tell you exactly why they're not. Because this is specific. It relates to the abortion industry. And they're never going to investigate the abortion industry anyway. So they know this doesn't cause them harm. If you have a group of crooked car dealers and a group of crooked Planned Parenthood facilities, under this new law, you can investigate the car dealers. You can't investigate the Planned Parenthood facilities. Those people in the media in California know we're never going to investigate them anyway. We don't care what they're doing. So this doesn't harm us. Now, if they had tried to expand this to all investigative journalism, where you can't do undercover taping or filming or come up with pretext where you're getting information out of this industry, if they'd have tried to do it across the board, yeah, the California media would have been up in arms over this. But since they targeted specifically at this one entity that they're not going to ever investigate anyway because they're in bed with them, they're okay with it.
I don't see how the law is going to stand.
I don't either, Melissa, but we see things pass all the time that I look at and I say, I don't see how this can happen. And then a court comes along and, well, as a court did in this case, a court did come along and rule that they could do this. Now, hopefully it'll continue going further, but anyway, David would be put in jail now in California.
Gosh. Well, speaking of David Daleiden, recently he was our keynote speaker at the Texas Right to Life annual gala. And I was really impressed with this young man. He is just led by his passion to uncover the truth and to speak about what he found behind closed doors. But something that I thought was really, really interesting as he was before the 1,000 people that were in that room, he said he was inspired. And he was inspired by one specific person, one specific organization, which so happens to be our Mark Crutcher in Life Dynamics, who, you guys were the original folks to step up and uncover the atrocities that are happening in the abortion industry. And he boldly credits you to inspiring him to 14 years later, 16 years later,
16 years.
coming back around and giving it a second shot at trying to open the eyes of this nation to exactly what's happening under our noses, that nobody wants to believe, but now with the technology that we have, we cannot deny what's happening.
Right.
Right.
Speaking of the video, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to go ahead and show that clip because I think our viewers will be interested in exactly the words from David's mouth.
And I have to thank another person who's here in the audience tonight as I start to talk about that, because that issue, that paradox, the cruelty and the commodification of our unborn brothers and sisters that is represented by Planned Parenthood's trafficking in aborted body parts, that's something that never would have come across my radar or anybody else's without the work of a very brave man who's in the audience tonight, Mark Crutcher, who's a good friend, who, before anybody else was talking about this, 16 years ago now, 16 years ago was when Mark and Life Dynamics did the very first seminal expose of the baby body parts issue. And back when this first came across my radar 6 years ago, there was nowhere you could get information about it other than from Mark Crutcher and his organization. If you wanted more information, there was no one you could talk to other than Mark. And so all of us in this room, and I think all of us in this country, and our descendants and unborn children to come, owe a huge debt of gratitude to Mark. So if you'd please give him a round of applause as well tonight.
Well, I'm very obviously flattered by that. But, one of the things we need to keep in mind is it doesn't matter who gets the credit. God gets the credit no matter what. God gave us the idea for this back when we did it originally, when Centra and I did this undercover investigation starting almost 20 years ago. And by the way, it's not over. As you know, there's some exciting things happening behind the scenes that in the next couple of years are going to show some real fruit.
Something I'd like to point out real quick about David and his work and his story, his account of all of the things that he has done now to expose the horrors of the abortion industry. And I'd like to say something specific to all the 20-somethings and 30-somethings that are watching, either at home or online. David's a 20-something. You don't have to be a certain age in order to really change the world. You should never let anybody make you feel ashamed because of your youth. Just because you're young doesn't mean that you can't save lives.
Yep.
Point.
I've pointed this out to Renee many times. I'm a big fan of the statement from Henry Ford. You know, you've heard me say it to you many times. The man who thinks he can and the man who thinks he can't are both right. And that's a really good statement. And that applies men, women, and young people. You know, one of the best examples I can give of this is about what young people are capable of doing. Who in here, I know you know because I've told you before, who is Milo Farnsworth? You know who Milo Farnsworth is?
I don't think I do.
He was a 16-year-old. He was a farm boy in Nebraska. You know what he invented? Television. A 16-year-old boy came up with the concept for television.
I don't know whether I like him or want to smack him. I know we're all addicted to this screen watching thing.
You know, and of course, you never know what young people are capable of doing as long as they have the confidence to go out there and just, you know what you've got to be willing to do though, again, I've told this to Renee a million times, you got to be willing to fail.
Yeah, without regard to risk. Speak up without regard to risk.
Get up off the-
Take action without regard to
You
risk.
get knocked down,
Yeah.
get up and fight again. And you never know what you're capable of doing. You're talking about 20-somethings. What's a bigger story in Texas than the Alamo? Nothing, right?
I'm like,
Yeah, you grew up in Texas. You grew up in Texas, right? You're now here. No bigger story than the Alamo. That's closer to us than that, right? The leader of the Alamo, the commander there was William Barrett Travis. He was 27 years old. He commanded the troops at the Alamo, 27 years old. So, yeah, if you're 20-something years old, if you're a teenager, don't think you can't do something about this issue. Get out there and fight. Get out there and get after it.
Before we switch gears, Mark, I just want to ask you, 16 years ago, you've done this undercover investigation. What were the steps taken to silence your voice during that time? Because we see the attack on the freedom of speech today. What was it like then?
It was grim at times. And again, this is something I've gone over with Renee because we're going to go through it again. And we may go through it again shortly, depending on what the political situation is. Yeah, we came under an enormous amount of attack. We didn't back off, and we weren't going to back off, and we won't back off the next time. But it would take a whole show to go into all the things that were happening. But I can tell you this, we were able to find out that our phones were illegally tapped. Our mail was being illegally opened. We have a big parking lot here next to our building across a little field. We were being watched. We'd look over there. Sometimes there would be a couple of like Crown Victorias, you know, with little hubcaps and black wall tires. We knew it was either FBI or police or Department of Justice. Somebody was watching the building. I actually bought a telescope. I still have it, as a matter of fact, up there. She's seen it. I actually had a telescope that I put on my desk so we could shoot license plate numbers of the people that were watching us. Zentrum, who was my assistant at the time, was followed one night. She had to drive to the Denton Police Department because she was afraid to go home and she was afraid to get out of her car. So, you know, you got to be prepared for those sort of attacks. And yeah, we came under a lot of attack, and it's going to happen again. The pro-life movement has to be prepared for that. That's the nature of what we do. But we are not given to a spirit of fear. We are given to a spirit of power that comes to us through our Christian faith. We are empowered by that. And so you do what you have to do. And David is under attack right now. He'll be under attack for a long time. We were under attack. We'll be under attack again, especially for some of the things that we're working on now. But that's the nature of what we do.
Well, thank you for leading the way on that, and we're ever grateful for David as well. And we'll continue the good fight.
Absolutely. All right. Several years ago, we did a show on LifeTalk here about abortion's influence on rock and roll. And don't get me wrong, I grew up in the rock and roll generation. I'm a big fan of rock and roll, so I'm not just saying this is a blanket condemnation. But, we found all these references to abortion, album covers with pictures of aborted babies on them. One of the examples I used was the guy from Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, committed suicide. And one of his albums was called In Utero. And when I wrote Lyme 5 years ago and we looked at people who work in the abortion industry, one of the things we found out was they have these strange dreams about the unborn child. And they will relate these dreams about the unborn child without talking to each other, unconnected to each other. They have the same types of dreams. And one of the most common traits of those dreams was they dreamed of these babies being apples hanging on a tree. That's how they saw them. And then you start seeing these album covers that we saw like In Utero, which really lays this out. But there was a bunch more. Zinter and I went down at the time and bought a bunch of these albums and had them here and showed them as B-roll. And all these references in these songs. And then Cobain, of course, eventually commits suicide. And we'd seen that sort of thing be fairly common in rock and roll. And you think in that lifestyle, the kind of lifestyle that people who are rock and roll stars, so to speak, engage in, you know that abortion's got to be fairly prevalent. I think it's now going to a different level. And there's a group called About Abortions now. And this is a very disturbing, very bizarre group, needless to say. And we're going to show a clip from one of their songs, and it's visuals that go along with it. It's online. You can go online and see it. You just look up About Abortions. And this one's called Amputation of Torment. That's the name of this song. And you'll often hear pro-aborts. I've been in debates with them where they will relate abortion to an amputation. And like, for example, do I have the right to tell you that you can't amputate your arm if you want to? Well, I don't have the right to tell you you can't kill your baby then if I can't tell you that. So they've made this connection between amputation and abortion in their own minds. I mean, it's a completely laughable connection, but it's one they've made. This group that's called About Abortions has a song called Amputation of Torment. And I want to warn people, this thing is very disturbing.
It's very disturbing.
It's very disturbing to watch. There's no graphic images in it or anything like that. But the sounds and
the screechings.
Well, when we found this, and Renee and I called you two and told you we were going to do this segment, and y'all didn't even want to see the whole thing. You went online and watched the deal. It's pretty disturbing. So it may or may not be something people want to watch, but I think it's something people need to understand so that they understand the culture that we live in. So let's watch this clip real quickly. We didn't show it all, obviously. We only showed a short part of this deal. But you got to admit, it is bizarre.
And you got to admit, that's not rock and roll. This is now a new category of music called depressive, suicidal black metal.
Yeah.
The intent is to develop a culture and a following of the acceptance of ending one's life and ending the life of others and just
it's
no regard for life.
It's a complete despair. And people that are in Christ don't have that despair. That's the difference between this. I don't want to say that you look at something and you see Satan everywhere. But if you don't see Satan in that deal, then you're not paying. Then Satan doesn't exist.
The song is a major reminder that's staring us right in the face, telling us this isn't a battle of flesh and blood that you're fighting. This is a spiritual battle. And if you listen to a song like this and you, like you're saying, Mark, you can't recognize Satan's hand in this, then something's not right.
It's very demonic.
Yeah. Once we saw it the first time,
It chills you to the bone.
Well, I mean, music is deep. It goes deep within, and you're not, as a Christian, you're not supposed to bring that into your life
Into your spirit.
Into your spirit, and so that's why it's.
But you have to know what's going on. And the problem we have with that is that this stuff is going into the spirits of our children because we don't know what's happening.
It's just like anything else with our children or things that we have in our house that aren't of God. You're supposed to rid it all because things have attachments to it, and so.
And once that stuff is in your mind, it's there forever.
It's been really hard for me to not think about it. I went ahead and took a look on YouTube, and you can see the words to the lyrics. And I was like, okay, I can't watch the entirety of the music video, so I'm just going to look at the words. And those are just as shocking and just as disturbing.
Yep.
And you're right, it chills you to the bone.
I
And
haven't seen
like I said, the name of the group is about abortions, and then this is Amputation of Torment. And there's some writing at the bottom of that video. It's kind of hard to read. And the writing is source of my psychosis. I mean, how much more clear do you need to be? This doesn't even require any interpretation. You know, you've seen these deals in the past where people say, well, if you play this song backwards, you'll hear these little messages. If you listen real closely, you can play this song. I mean, I hear that stuff and I think, I don't hear anything. But you can't deny this.
Yeah. Well, as a mom of a teenage son, I just want to issue a warning to all parents, all grandparents, all Christians, that this isn't one of those hidden message type of
No, it's out there.
waves in the music industry. This is very overt. It's very in the face of our youth, and it's not just some fad of heavy sounding music.
Right.
It's satanic,
It's scary.
and we need to stop it.
Right.
Yeah.
It really is. All right. Thanks. Not a happy show to end with that on that, but kind of the nature of what we do. Thanks. Appreciate it. That's all the time we have. We'll see you next week. Until then, remember, Life Dynamics is not here to put up a good fight. We're here to win, because winning is how the killing stops.